Recording started. Hello everyone. It is noon and we'll probably have a few people kind of trickle in as we go, but I'm going to go ahead and get started. My name is Catherine Tuttle and I'm the Alumni Career Services Coordinator here in the Alumni Association. Our topic today is work-life balance, and it's something that I think we all struggle with at times. Work is such a huge part of our life. We spend 40, 50, 60 or more hours sometimes a week at work, so in many ways it becomes part of our self-identity. At the same time, we have these other roles that we have to play in our life, whether that's husband, wife, mother, father, sister, brother, friend, caregiver. The list goes on and on. So finding balance is tricky, but it's an essential part of our lives so that we can enjoy our life to the fullest. I'm excited to be joined today by Sarah Levitt. She is a 91 alumna of NC State and a well-respected life and business coach here in the Triangle. She strives to create positive change in individuals and organizations, and she emphasizes strategic thinking, inspiration, and practical application. Before we begin and before I turn it over to Sarah, I want to go over a few quick housekeeping items. We will be taking questions periodically, so if we're talking and a thought comes into your mind and you want to ask a question, please feel free to either raise your hand. You'll notice on the left-hand side of your screen in this column there is, under your name, a hand icon. If you click on that and you want to ask a question live with a microphone, we can actually turn the mic over to you and you can ask Sarah a question live. Or if you prefer, you can chat a question to us. So if you see at the bottom left there is a chat box. I've typed a message in there about the audio wizard. If you want to just type a question in there as it comes up, I'll read it aloud to the group. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Sarah.
Thank you, Catherine. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you.
Fantastic. So thank you to Catherine and the Alumni Association for having me. I'm thrilled to be here, and thank you guys for joining in. A couple of things before we get started. I'm going to be mentioning several resources, so if anyone would like a reference material list or a resource list, please feel free to email me at sarah@sarah-levitt.com, and I'm glad to get that to you. And I welcome your questions. So I'm going to stop periodically and ask you guys to, if you have questions or to share your stories, but don't wait for me to do that. If you have a question and you want to jump in, please feel free. So without further ado, let's get going. So when I'm working one-on-one with clients or speaking to audiences about life balance and well-being and happiness, right? And I ask people what comes to mind and how they would describe what life balance and greater happiness and well-being would be. I typically hear several themes. One of them is less stress, not surprisingly, right? Another is just kind of more enjoyment out of life. I once heard someone say kind of less feeling like being on a treadmill, which I thought was a great description. And then oftentimes people just say they want more time to just kind of live life. So today what I'm going to be talking to you about, and we're going to go for about an hour or so, what I'm going to be talking about and suggesting is that well-being and happiness and ultimately life balance are less about time management. And it's not that time management strategies can't be effective. They can be. But it's really less about time management than it is about managing, kind of intentionally managing our own systems and their energy and how we roll through the world. Because everybody, as Catherine was saying, we all have multiple roles, most of us, in our lives. Everybody has a very full plate. So it's less about kind of figuring out how we're going to get everything into a day and on a calendar than it is about how we're going to roll through that day. I like to say that life rolls to all of us. It's a matter of how we kind of roll through life. So what I'm going to be talking about a whole bunch is the concept of kind of managing your own personal bank account. And if you get nothing else out of our time together today, my wish for you would be that this concept is something that you take away with you. So if you think about each of us having energy reserves and that they're limited, right? Each day we each have limited energy reserves, and we have lots to do in a day, whether that's as a spouse, a parent, a volunteer, an employer, or an employee. We have lots and lots to do, and so we have, our systems have essentially energy reserves. We can either work to kind of invigorate ourselves and be self-sustaining, or we can, oftentimes unbeknownst to us, kind of drain our own reserves. And we're going to talk more about this personal bank account analogy later on. But if you think about a bank account and it being drained or drawn down upon, if we are not replenishing it, and oftentimes we're not, if we're not kind of consciously paying attention to replenishing it, our well-being and our ability to have life balance is really affected. So when we talk about kind of sustaining our systems, you know, I like to ask people what it is that fuels them. And so when I'm speaking to audiences and I say, you know, what makes a deposit into your bank account? People pretty much know what fuels them. And things that I hear are time spent with friends. I often hear things like curling up with a good book, or spending time with my family. Many times I hear people saying, oh, if I just go out and go for a long bike ride or a run or a long walk, that really boosts my energy and kind of calms me down from the day and refuels me. And those things that people mention, interestingly, very, very, very much correlate to what positive psychologists show in their evidence-based research that do in fact sustain us. And positive psych is the study of essentially what human beings look like when we thrive over the course of our lifetime, as opposed to what we might look like during times of illness. And in the last 10 years, Martin Seligman is the founding father of the positive psychology movement. He's out of the University of Pennsylvania. He's written a book, many books, but most recently has kind of culled and pulled together lots of the research, and again, this is evidence-based research in positive psych, and he's correlated our well-being and kind of maintaining and fueling our systems to 5 different domains. Not surprisingly, they are very much reflected when I ask audiences, you know, what fuels you? When you kind of are feeling drained, what invigorates you? Not surprisingly, they absolutely correlate to what people are saying. And the first of those domains is positive emotion. So you can imagine that when things kind of get wonky during your day, and they get wonky for all of us, right? Our ability to kind of look at them and not feel overly drained, or our ability to kind of roll with the punches, so to speak, right? Roll with life, is determined by, in some measure, our positive emotions. So I like to ask people, you know, who are you spending time with that boosts your positive emotion and your energy? And we all kind of know, right? We intuitively know what it feels like to be around someone that drains us, and we all know what it feels like to be around someone that really kind of gives us a boost. So when I'm talking to either audiences or my one-on-one clients, I ask people to consider, you know, who do you feel good around? What people and what situations and activities, for that matter, really facilitate positive emotion to create kind of an upward spiral of positive momentum versus you know, a negative spiral of feeling drained. So when you think about positive emotion as well, it isn't just kind of a feeling of happiness, but it could be the whole kind of continuum and range of positive emotion, like hope and love and joy and contentedness and elation. So that is one domain to kind of think about that correlates to our ability to refuel our systems and roll with the punches so that we can kind of deal with that incredibly full plate. The next domain that Seligman has kind of mentioned is what he calls engagement within. And I like to talk to clients and describe that as downtime, essentially. That's the time, it's often spent just with ourselves, but it's the time where we really refuel and recharge our batteries quietly. Positive psychologists refer to this as often being in a state of flow. So we're really engaged in what we're doing. We often forget about being hungry or watching the clock. And some examples from clients that I've gotten are reading or playing a musical instrument or going out and doing some kind of exercise. But that engagement within, again, that kind of quiet time, is a way to recharge and refuel your bank account, right? Because we all have those individual bank accounts. So a question when you're thinking about, geez, you know, what fuels me? What makes a deposit rather than drains me? Something to think about is specifically what activities really take you to a place of calm and kind of sustained happiness or joy, and what nourishes you. Again, some of the examples I've gotten over the years are anything ranging from, you know, a long walk to being out on a bike to playing a musical instrument. Oftentimes it seems that people who play piano, that's their downtime, so to speak. They're really engaged. They feel completely focused on what they're doing. They lose all track of time. So before I kind of move through these other three domains that correlate to our happiness, does anybody have a question or a story they want to share, either about positive emotion or kind of downtime or engagement within? I'll give you just a sec.
And if you have a microphone, it's very easy to ask your question out loud. So all you have to do is raise your hand and we can let you speak to the group.
Okay, I'll keep going, but again, feel free to jump in with questions or examples. I love to hear from you guys. And then the third domain that really correlates to kind of boosting our reserves and sustaining us, not surprisingly, our relationships with others. And again, when I'm talking to people and when I'm talking to audiences or clients, and I say, so, what fuels you? Invariably and undoubtedly, people always say, time with my spouse or my children or a dear friend or time with my family. So relationships with others are really important, kind of that social fabric, really important to our well-being and happiness, and the reserves, the energy that we have to roll through the world. And so one way to think about it is, who are really in your kind of inner circle. And when I talk to people about their core relationships and the ones that sustain them, I always ask, think about those people that truly kind of nourish you. After you leave there, you again feel invigorated versus drained. And also, are there oftentimes there are expectations that we're supposed to have, like gazillions of friendships particularly. But in fact, what we see is that a strong social fabric can be constituted really by a small group of core people. These are the people that you really go to in times of hardship. I like to say they've got your back. And they nourish and fuel you. And those are the people with whom you feel at peace. So again, when you're thinking about, geez, how can I spend my time, because we all often feel like we have too little of it, so how can I consciously spend my time such that I'm spending it with people who sustain and nourish me? How can I make sure that I'm getting that? I know I often tell people that my best friend and I have been dear, dear friends for 20 years, and we figured out a long time ago when our lives got really busy that we really valued the connection, but we're finding that we were trading voicemails all the time. And so we made a regular Tuesday night, in fact tonight's my call with her, we made a regular Tuesday night call, and we both made it a priority in our lives because that relationship fuels both of us and sustains us. The fourth domain that Seligman has kind of isolated as correlating to sustaining and fueling us is meaning and purpose. And so again, not surprisingly, when I ask people what makes a deposit in their personal bank account, oftentimes I'll hear things like volunteering at my place of worship or helping somebody out. Meaning and purpose is really that sense that we are connected to something bigger than ourselves, that there's meaning to our lives, and that we belong to something bigger. So again, it could be volunteering, right? It could be raising a child, but it's that sense of meaning and purpose. So I like to ask people, when we're talking about, what fuels you, what do you do in your life that gives you a sense of meaning and purpose, and how can you kind of get more of that, again, to bolster your bank account as opposed to drain it. And then the last domain is achievement. And typically, we associate achievement with work, which is great. It can be more than that, though, and across multiple different things. So it's typically achievement, I like to tell people, is that thing that we typically stretch for. So it could be running a first race. It could be learning a new taking up a new hobby, but it's that thing that we kind of stretch for and feel good about, an accomplishment or a success. And so something to think about is what in each of our lives contributes to that. So work is obviously, a primary contributor, but, it's nice to think about it in other ways as well. So before I kind of move on to more about the bank account and what drains and deposits into it, I want to pause here and see if anybody wants to chime in or type a question. Okay, I'm not hearing anything, so I'm going to keep going. But if you've got something, feel free.
Sarah, Bianca does have a question. She's wondering what happens if we don't take the time to refuel?
Yeah, I just saw that. That's a fantastic question, and we're going to talk more about the bank account in just a minute. And it's a great question when I ask audiences. So essentially, if you think about your personal reserves, as being somewhat limited, right? And our ability to roll through life and manage that full plate, being contingent upon having our reserves kind of full. And I'm going to talk about this in a little bit. Richard Boyazzi out of Case Western Reserve did the research on this, and he found that every day, so baseline every day, this is not under kind of extraordinary circumstances, we all are kind of bump up against 8 to 12 negative stress events a day. And those, as you can imagine, draw down on our reserves. So if we are and in fact, it's interesting, Bianca, because I often ask audiences this exact same question. So if we have 8 to 12 negative stress events a day that draw down, right, and you think of each of us as having a personal bank account, then what happens if we don't refuel? And people often use the words, we become bankrupt or overdrawn or withdrawn or, that kind of thing. But that's exactly what happens. We have less to roll through life with. We have less reserve. And it's oftentimes so the way it manifests is people will feel super, super, super stressed. And or burned out. So when I see kind of corporate burnout in some of my executive clients, it's that they are caught in, again, this is Richard Boyazzi, they're caught in a cycle of self-sacrifice as opposed to a cycle of renewal. And the bank account analogy is just a nice one to think about in terms of how we make deposits. And I actually kind of adapted that from John Gottman, who did research. He's the leading researcher on marriage, and he talks about the emotional bank account in a couple. But we all have we all have our personal bank accounts too. Let me know if I didn't answer your question, but typically it's, I'm fried, I need to leave my job, or I need to completely overhaul my life, or I need to go sit on a beach for 3 weeks to recuperate. So that's typically what happens if we don't refuel. It's just we're not kind of sustainable. At the very least, we kind of become grumpy. At least I know I do. I'm not all that pleasant to be around if I'm not doing what I need to take care of myself. So let me know if that didn't answer your question.
Yeah, Sarah, I wanted to ask a question as well in terms of, you mentioned meaning and purpose as the fourth piece. How important is it that your work actually give you some sense of meaning and purpose?
That's a great question. So oftentimes, these domains that Seligman kind of correlated to our well-being. Again, he's pulled it from lots of research in positive psychology. I think one of the most important things is that these domains are kind of cross-directional. In other words, in an ideal world, you hit the nail on the head, Catherine. In an ideal world, your work would give you positive, right? It would tap as many domains as possible. It would give you positive emotion. It would perhaps give you, a solid relationship with someone else. But it would give you positive emotion. It would give you engagement. It would give you meaning and purpose. If your work does not bring that to you, then I would say, it's important to look extra hard and work extra hard to find it elsewhere. And that could be within your family, could be, again, volunteering in the community, could be within friendships. Ideally, I was at the Harvard Coaching Conference last year, and someone did a diagram on this, which I thought was fabulous. It was Dr. Snook. Ideally, the sweet spot for us, for all of us in work, is something that we feel passionate about, B, that we are well compensated for, and C, that we find to be meaningful, and we are good at it. So good at it, passionate about it, and well compensated. Oftentimes people can get into a level of fairly high dissatisfaction if they're good at it and they're well compensated, but they're not passionate about it. So my long answer would be, in an ideal world, you would find meaning and purpose in your work for sure. And if not, then to look in other areas of your life for it.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, sure. You guys are asking great questions. So when we look at, again, kind of those 5 domains that kind of correlate, and Catherine kind of, opened up this discussion, is, think about, okay, where could I be generating more positive emotion? Who could I be hanging out? Who do I enjoy hanging out with? First of all, who do I enjoy hanging out with? Are there activities that I've let go or haven't explored in a long time that I really love to do that feed my sense of well-being? Again, we're talking about life balance really being contingent upon our ability to kind of roll with life in that full plate. So getting to kind of, Bianca's question earlier, Richard Boyassi has documented these negative stress events, each of us getting 8 to 12 of them a day, and he says the first one is when the alarm goes off in the morning. It's the first negative stress event that we all experience. Physiologically, we're kind of shocked, into alertness. And those are drawdowns. And when we're experiencing a negative stress event, and it could be small, like the alarm going off, it needn't be, a huge event. It draws down on our reserves, and it essentially sends us into fight or flight, which we are kind of hardwired for. And when we're in fight or flight, a bunch of things happen. we are considering either running in the other direction, crouching in the bushes, or putting up a fight. Hopefully not with the alarm clock. But our thinking becomes much more rigid. So when I'm working with organizations, right, and leadership teams, this is really important in terms of leadership styles if you want to get the most out of your people. Our thinking becomes more rigid. We are far less creative and less flexible, and we're less collaborative as individuals and as members of the communities in which we exist, whether that's work or family or out in the community in which we live. In fact, I like to tell people that our peripheral vision literally narrows. We can't see as much when we're in fight or flight. So if you think about our individual bank account and those 8 to 12 negative stress events a day drawing down on our reserves, then it's important to think about what we need to do, and this goes to Bianca's question, what we need to do to kind of make deposits into the bank account so that we can essentially manage that full plate in a way that is sustainable to us. So I'm going to give 3 practices that are really shown, again, this is evidence-based, really shown to contribute to our well-being and overall happiness. The first is to kind of create or cultivate some kind of a centering practice, or you could call it a mindfulness practice. It does not have to be meditation. I want to make that clear. It could be, absolutely, but it's just something that you're able to do that connects you to kind of calm and center. Because, I like to tell clients and myself that we get good at what we practice. And so if we're always kind of living in a really stressed out, off-center kind of way, it can be hard to know when, A, how to get back to calm, how to find our way back, or B, that it even exists. So by practicing some activity, and I'm going to give you some examples from my clients' lives, some activity or practice that grounds us to calm, it's much easier to know when we've been launched into fight or flight and to bring ourselves back. So examples from my clients' lives, certainly, light, mild exercise is one of them. I often hear from people that if they are out walking or rollerblading or going for a jog or going for a bike ride, that they find that the stress of the day really falls away. I'm thinking about a client who is an executive and comes home to take his doggie for a walk, a nice slow walk. So again, could be meditation, could be yoga, absolutely. But the idea is that it is something that drops you into a place of, the feeling where your body just kind of, and mind kind of go, relaxation, a place of wordlessness, where the to-do list of everything that's on that plate, pick up the kids, drop off the car for the oil change, make sure you email somebody, shop for groceries, all that stuff, where that to-do list and the monkey chatter that surrounds it kind of fades away. So that's strategy number 1, is finding a centering practice. And I want to encourage you to try different ones. In other words, you need not have just one. You can have a bunch of them in your toolkits. One of my clients loves to go kayaking because they find that both the rhythmic motion of paddling or using the oar, forgive me to kayakers, I'm not sure I'm using the right the right terminology, but that rhythmic motion of kind of pushing through the water is soothing. And the sound of the water is soothing. So trying different activities or practices to kind of create calm. And again, this isn't an everyday kind of thing. I often have clients ask me, do I have to do this every day, Sarah? Start out by doing it twice a week or 3 times a week, and it doesn't have to be for a long time. Start maybe with 10 minutes, a few times a week, and see how you feel. But again, the idea is to just drop to a place of calm where your body and mind go, and it could be sitting at the table with a cup of tea. The second practice that really is shown to fuel and sustain and replenish us is what I call cultivating our thinking or cultivating optimism. What we tell ourselves, so the stories that we tell ourselves are incredibly powerful. And you can imagine that if we tell ourselves a lot of negative stuff that can be draining and distressing, or if we tell ourselves something more soothing, it can be more sustaining. So I'm going to give a very practical example of this. Imagine that you are late for work one day, you've got a big meeting, and you are racing to get to this meeting. You work in a building and your office is at the very tippy top of the building. You're racing to get to the elevator. You're sweaty because you've been racing. This is not fun because you've been running to get there. Just after the elevator doors closed, you're kind of composing yourself, you know, checking your dress, everything, or your suit, everything's okay. And you are kind of hit from behind. You're jostled from behind. Well, you ignore it the first time. It happens again, and it happens again. Most of us, when I ask people, when I do this exercise with audiences, most people, when I ask what people are feeling, it's some form of, you know, anger, frustration. One person, I recently was speaking to a group, one person said, I'm ready to turn around and hit them. You know, it's like, what is going on? Why is this person bothering me? Why are they, you know, jostling me in this elevator? What's going on? So now I want you to rewind. And I want you to think about that exact same scenario. You're running, you're late for work, you get to the elevator, the door's closed, and you're immediately jostled and bumped from behind. But this time, instead of standing there and fuming about it, you turn around to find that there is an older lady with a cane who's blind, and that's why you've been bumped 4 or 5 times on your way up to work at the elevator. That's how powerful our thinking is. Our emotion is driven by our thinking. And so that's kind of a concrete example of what we tell ourselves, determining our emotions, which really then determine our actions and determine the results that we create in our lives. So our thinking and cultivating optimism is super, super, super important. Let me spend a minute on optimism. That does not mean being a Pollyanna and sweeping bad things under the rug. What it does mean is kind of becoming an observer of what we think and not slanting toward the negative, which, by the way, we are all inclined to. It's how our brains are built. Researchers in positive psych call it the negativity bias. Our brains are wired to scan the horizon for what threats could be lurking, right? From the days when we had to worry about being eaten by lions and tigers and bears. But that's not the case so much anymore, but yet our brains are kind of hardwired that way. So the first thing in kind of cultivating optimism and cultivating our thinking is to become an observer of what we are thinking. And to really just kind of tune in to the stories that we are telling ourselves and ask, you know, is this distressing or is this soothing? Is there a different story, a possibility that I could be telling myself about this person, about this event, that would be more soothing? So the first thing is kind of listening to what we tell ourselves, becoming an observer. The next thing is to actively seek out the good stuff. Rick Hansen, in his book Buddha's Brain, again, if anybody wants a resource list, I'm happy to send it to you. Just email me at sarah@sarah-levitt.com. Rick Hansen, in his book Buddha's Brain, calls this hunting the good, and it is actively looking for, we're going to talk more about this later, but it's actively looking for the good stuff, really noticing it. That noticing and naming cements together and literally creates a deposit into our bank account. So it's turning our brains away from the negative and toward the good stuff that's happening. This is I'm going to talk more about this again later, but this is a particularly nice thing to do around the dinner table with kids at the end of the day. It's kind of say, 3 good things that happened during the day. The next strategy under cultivating optimism or cultivating our thinking is listening for catastrophizing. And this is straight out of Seligman's research. Again, we are hardwired, meaning that's the way our brains are built, for kind of scanning the horizon for the bad stuff. So let me give you an example. You go out one morning, you're on your way to work, and you find that you have a flat tire. Catastrophizing is when we start thinking something like this, and we've all done this, myself included. We start thinking things like this. Oh my God, I have a flat tire. I'm going to be late for work. If I'm late for work, I'm going to miss that meeting. If I miss that meeting, I'm going to get fired. If I get fired, I might not be married anymore because we really need my income and my spouse is going to be disappointed in me. And if I am not married anymore, that means I might be getting a divorce, and it might mean dealing with custody issues with the kids, so et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We kind of get into a negative spiral before we even know what's happening. Again, this goes to observing our thinking. So being aware of what we're thinking, kind of observing it, and noticing if we are spinning a whole nother story that is distressing versus soothing is helpful. So Rick Hansen refers to the story that we tell ourselves about the negative event as the second dart. So the first event is no fun. Absolutely. It is no fun to walk outside and find that your tire is flat. That's the negative event. And it's not fun. But the story we spin from that is where a lot of our resources, our emotional resources, are drained as opposed to sustained. And that's the stuff that can really, that's kind of the stuff of suffering and unpleasantness and definitely distress. So to be mindful of what we're telling ourselves can do a couple of things. It can bring us back to the present, which is like, wow, I just have a flat tire, let me deal with that, as opposed to catastrophizing about a future that hasn't happened. And it can kind of keep us calm. The last thing under the last strategy, I should say, under cultivating our thinking and cultivating optimism, and there's certainly more than this, I'm just giving you kind of a handful of strategies, is what I call looking through the lens of opportunity, or what positive psychologists might call, finding meaning in pain. So life, as we said at the beginning, life rolls to all of us, and there are going to be some days where that are more challenging than others. There, absolutely no doubt about it. There are events that happen in our lives. One thing that I like to do when I'm talking to audiences is I like to give this exercise. So I'm going to give this to you guys to do right now, and I'm going to give you a few minutes to work on it, and then if somebody wants to share their example, that would, if a couple people want to share, that would be fabulous. And then I've got some client examples I can give you as well. So how we think of, again, cultivating our thinking, cultivating optimism, how we think of what's going on really determines 90% of our happiness, well-being, and our ability to balance what's going on in our lives. Again, boosting and refueling that bank account. So looking through the lens of opportunity, this exercise involves thinking about a favorite thing in your life. It could be a person, it could be time in your life, it could have been a particular day, it could be a pet. So a person, a pet, a time in your life. Think about your favorite thing. Take a minute. Most people can usually think of their favorite thing really quickly. So think of your favorite thing, and then I want you to think backwards to a supposedly negative event that enabled you to have your favorite thing. And most people, when I first kind of do this exercise, are kind of slightly unsure of how to think about this. So let me give you an example. I was speaking in a large conference, and I was doing this exercise with the audience, and one of the audience members immediately was able to think about her favorite thing, which was her daughter. Popped up for her immediately. And then, but really had a hard time kind of coming up with the quote-unquote terrible or negative event that allowed her or enabled her to have her daughter. She had to go way, way, way back to when she was a girl living in another country. And when she and her family of origin, were ejected from that country and had to immigrate to the United States. This was clearly a challenging and somewhat traumatic event for her. She was a girl. She was leaving her home. It was really hard. Having said that, without that happening, she said, she would never have come to the United States, where she later, many years later, met her husband, who then she had her daughter with. So I want you to take a few minutes and think about a favorite thing in your life. I'll give you just a couple of minutes here. Think about a favorite thing in your life, and then I want you to think back to the negative or quote-unquote terrible event that enabled you to have it. And if you guys want to write these in on chat and share them, or just call in, that would be fabulous. But I'd love to hear from you. This is one of my favorite things to do with audiences, and I get to hear some pretty cool things. So I'll give you just a couple minutes. And if anybody's unsure of, or if anybody's unsure about kind of that exercise, just let me know.
It looks like we've got at least one person who's writing in, so we'll give them a minute.
Great. Yeah, no, I'll give it a few minutes because usually it takes a little bit. Thank you. And by the way, you might have to go back quite a ways to find this. Sometimes you don't have to, but you might have to go back quite a ways to find the terrible or negative event that ended up leading you to your favorite thing. Okay, so Dan, thank you. Dan just wrote in that his favorite thing is his daughter, fantastic, and the negative event that enabled him to have his daughter was spending 10 months in Iraq. And let's see, somebody else just wrote in and said, Melanie wrote in and said her son is her favorite thing, and the thing that allowed her to have that favorite thing was her dealing with his father's drama and kind of negative stuff. So thank you guys for sharing. I'll give you a couple of examples from audiences that I've heard from as well. And it's often the case that I hear that a child is someone's favorite thing, and they'll say, wow, you know, this is my favorite thing, and as hard as it was to go through the divorce, you know, to meet the person that I had this child with and perhaps go through a divorce, as hard as that was, that enabled me to have my, you know, my child this favorite thing. Another one that I heard was fantastic. from a guy who was walking him. So he said his wife was his favorite thing. They had been married for a long time, happy marriage. And when he looked back to the negative thing that enabled him to have his wife, he was actually dating someone else at the time. This is way back in college. He was dating someone else at the time, and he was on his way to to go out on a date with this girl. And I think they might have even been having some challenges. And his car broke down, which is definitely, not a whole lot of fun, definitely a negative event. So his car broke down. He was stranded on the side of the road. So there's the negative event. And it so happened that this girl stopped by to see if she could help him. She saw him stranded on the side of the road. And that girl became his wife. So had he not broken down on the side of the road, had that not happened, he would not have met his wife. So thank you guys for sharing. And if anyone else wants to type in, please feel free to do so. But the idea here is that when negative stuff happens, and it does happen to all of us, how can we find meaning in it? And this is one way to do it. A couple of questions that I like to ask myself when some not so fun stuff is happening. A couple of questions I like to ask myself are, is it possible that I can't see the whole picture? And is it possible that it's all going to shake out just fine? So again, when we think about our personal bank accounts and being in a cycle of nourishment and replenishment as opposed to self-sacrifice and, kind of drawdowns for our personal reserves, cultivating our thinking and cultivating optimism, being aware of the stories we tell ourselves and the emotions that we generate from them is really, really really important. I'll give you another kind of concrete example. So John Gottman, I mentioned him recently at the beginning of the conversation, has done all this research on, he's probably the premier researcher in the country on marriage, and he calls this positive sentiment override or negative sentiment override. So you know the feeling, right? When your spouse walks through the door and they've forgotten to pick up the quart of milk that you asked them to pick up on their way home from work, right? When this is how powerful our thinking is. When we're in a positive frame of mind, we will likely tell ourselves, oh, they forgot, they've got a lot on their plate, no big deal, I'll just ask them to do it again, or I'll go get it myself, or we kind of don't think much of it. When we're in a negative frame of mind, when we're in negative sentiment override, that same exact event happens. So our spouse comes home without the quart of milk, right? And instead of thinking, oh, wow, they must have had a really hard day, it's not like them to forget, we'll figure out how to get the quart of milk. Instead of that, we might think things like, they never remember what I asked them to do. They're always forgetting. I'm so tired of, usually this is when people start laughing, I'm so tired of having to repeat myself. So the situation is the same. It's how we're looking at it that has changed. Research shows quite clearly that almost half, it's 40% of our happiness is within our power. So 10% of it is circumstantial, 50% of it is genetic. In other words, whether we lean toward a glass half full or half empty, that's genetic. But 40%, so almost the remaining half, is absolutely within our power. And these are some of the strategies that we've been talking about today. The third and the last practice strategy that I want to give you for refueling and making a deposit into your bank account is the practice of gratitude. Research absolutely unequivocally shows that it is a meta strategy for happiness and well-being and sustaining ourselves so that we can have balance in a positive way. So I'm going to talk to you about a few strategies within gratitude. And hopefully you'll be able to take one or two of them away and actually be able to practice them. So practice of gratitude can take place, what I like to call, in 3 different time zones. We can notice things. Again, this goes back to noticing and naming the good stuff, right? So we can notice things in the present and be grateful for them. Could be you walk outside after being inside all day into a beautiful day and you go, wow, this, just a gorgeous day. Could be that you have a great day at work. It could be anything, but you are present in your gratitude. That's present. It could be anticipatory. It could be that I know someone who really practices gratitude this way. They are always forward-looking in their gratitude, and none of these is better than the other. The key is just practicing gratitude. So anticipatory gratitude might be, I'm really looking forward to going to the beach next weekend, or I can't wait to go to that family reunion, or I can't wait to go out on that date with that person, or can't wait to do just about anything. It's that anticipatory, I'm looking forward to, and really kind of savoring that. Or third time zone is it can be reminiscent. So it can be reflecting back on the good stuff and savoring that. The trick here is twofold. It is noticing. So again, it's orienting our brains toward the good stuff. And again, this is a great activity to do around the dinner table with kids. Orienting our brains toward the good stuff and then actively savoring it, like staying there for a few minutes in your mind and just savoring it. You can also savor it with someone else. So it gets even amplified, it gets bigger, gets exponential if you're able to savor it with someone else. So if you think about your social network that we talked about, right, relationships, so it might be when you get together with a friend, you guys reminisce over that great time that you went to the beach, or the time that you all went out to dinner. Could be with family, again, with those core relationships where you're noticing and reminiscing and savoring, you're savoring the deliciousness of that memory. Gratitude can also be written. So you can literally kind of write down in your journal, the stuff that you're grateful for. And by the way, it doesn't have to be enormous stuff. It can be very simple things like the cup of warm coffee that you had this morning that woke you up. The trick is to kind of change it up, to get your brain constantly kind of looking for the good stuff. We know that our brains are elastic. In other words, they're trainable. And we get, again, going back to what I said earlier, we get good at what we practice. So the ability to kind of look for the good, change our thinking to the positive, and look for the things that we are grateful for, we get better at it with practice. Just like we get better at thinking negatively with practice, we get better at thinking positively with practice as well. And so initially it might seem awkward or uncomfortable to actively look for the good stuff to be grateful for, but with a little bit of practice it becomes much easier and kind of almost like second nature. So around the dinner table, if you've got kids, this is I've had clients do this with a lot of success. You can notice and name the good stuff. So you can do, let's name 3 good things that happened to each of us today, and then the add-ons to that are, what did you do, or what did your child do in getting that good thing to happen, and how can you get more of it? So maybe your child says, one of the good things that happened today was I got an A on my test, right? So the parts of that are, well, what did you do to get that, right? What part did you play in creating that? Well, maybe I studied hard, I got a study buddy, I didn't leave everything to the last minute, whatever that is. And then how can I get more of that? How can I get more A's? It could be that you had a great interaction with a coworker that you're grateful for. Again, it could be that morning cup of coffee that was fantastic. So, geez, I left home in time to stop at my favorite coffee place and relax for a few minutes. Might have been the role you had in creating it. And how do I do that more often? Well, I can always leave the house 10 minutes early and then I can stop and get my cup of coffee, and it really sets my day off in the right direction. You can also write, this is another form of gratitude as we wind down here. You can write a letter. This is, Martin Seligman researched this. The positive emotion that's generated from gratitude is just huge, really, really big. And another way to practice gratitude is to write a letter to someone for whom you are grateful in very specific detail. So not just kind of a general letter, but a specific letter. And then you can either choose to mail it or not, but that activity, that actual activity of writing the letter is really boosts positive emotion. So as we wind down, I want to kind of leave you with a couple of questions to think about. Oftentimes when I speak to people who have very full lives, who are challenged by trying to find some happiness and well-being and life balance amidst all the hurriedness, when I ask people what they like to do for kind of fun and relaxation, what fuels them, sometimes people have been so stressed for so long that they don't know. And so I like to ask them this question. So if you're one of those folks out there, this is an interesting question to think might help you get to what it is that fuels you. And that is, what did you do as a kid that made you lose all track of time? And this also goes to Catherine's question at the beginning about work having meaning and purpose. If you are, oftentimes, some of my clients whom I'm coaching may have lost their way with what they love to do and are trying to find their way back to it in some way, whether that's volunteering or doing that professionally, but aren't quite sure actually what it is or what it was that they love to do. So asking themselves, what did I like to do as a kid that made me lose all track of time, can be an entryway. If you're in career transition, it can be an entryway to opening doors for what it is you might love to do. And then the second question that I'd like to leave you with today as we wind down is, and this goes to cultivating optimism and cultivating the way you think, is if you saw yourself as the hero of your journey, what story would you write? You guys have been absolutely fantastic today. I have appreciated the questions and the input. We have a few minutes as we wind down, so I'm going to open up the floor for any stories or questions. And if you have anything that you'd like answered and don't feel comfortable sharing it here, would like to hit me up back channel, feel free to email me at sarah@sarah-levitt.com. And again, I'm happy to provide a resource list for all of the books and resources that I mentioned. Any questions, comments?
Sarah, it looks like we have a question. Could you go more into being your hero? Tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah, sure. So the exercise, that kind of last question I left you with, if you saw yourself as the hero of your journey, what story would you write? That is a question of, so oftentimes when negative stuff happens to us, we can paint that in a particular kind of way, right? The event is the same, but how we look at it is different. So if you've been through a particularly challenging time, writing your story, and you might do this as a journal activity or just even think about it, but writing your story as the hero of your journey as opposed to being the victim can be really empowering. So it might be, wow, I was laid off from my job, but I networked effectively and I got back up on my feet, and even though it took me 6 months to find a new position, it gave me opportunity to spend time with my family. I got to know myself better. I got to know my strengths even better, and I found a new position that enabled me to grow in my professional life. It gave me more flexibility at home, et cetera, et cetera. So it is literally constructing your story and regarding your story where you are the hero as opposed to the victim. Does that answer your question? Great. Fantastic. And then someone else had a question. Bianca, your suggestions sound great, but I'm not sure how to balance them with working full-time and raising an infant. Yes, you any ideas from your past clients? Yeah, so Bianca, you have an incredibly full plate. Working full-time and raising an infant. What I would suggest is any time that you can grab for yourself, anything. In fact, I was just coaching someone on this in a very practical, strategic sense, so I'll give you this example. She, again, same thing, working full-time and 2 kids at home, and one with special needs that required, kind of special attention and special care. And she and her husband had looked at different school situations, et cetera, et cetera. I won't go into too much detail and bore you with that. But long story short, we brainstormed on what was important to her, and it was, being able to be at home on time with her kids at the end of the day, having the kids kind of transported by someone else so she wasn't taking up that time, so she could have quality time with them in the evenings, and having kind of backup resources for when her husband was out of town traveling. And when we brainstormed, I gave her the suggestion, instead of hiring a babysitter, because the kids were in a school situation where they had 3 weeks on, 3 weeks off, I think, we looked at the feasibility of hiring a full-time live-in nanny. Now, they had the income to support that, but they had to really kind of take a look at it, and they did that. The point, though, is what is important to you? So what do you really value? And this is different for everybody. There's no right or wrong, Bianca. What do you really value, and how can you get that even in small measure? And working full-time and with an infant, you have, I would imagine, very, very little time for and with yourself. And my guess is trying to carve out even a little bit of that a couple times a week might give you the ability to replenish yourself. So start small. I always tell people, start small. Figure out what you value, what your goal is. Start small and work your way back from there. So it might be just, a couple times a week, you're able to go for a long walk, a 30-minute walk. And feel free to hit me up back channel if you need more insight.
Yeah, Bianca, I'll give you, personally, I can relate to that, being a working mom and having a now 2-year-old. I'll give you 2 things that work for me personally. One, I've learned to actually take advantage of my lunch time, which is something I was very bad about doing previously. So I was the person who would work straight through lunch and never take a break. But I've learned to at least once a week take that hour and try to meet someone to reconnect. Whether that's a friend or a coworker, to build some personal time into the day. And the other thing that works really well for me is, and I am a morning person, so I'll preface it with that, is getting up earlier, before my husband, before my child, to take that time in the morning, whether that's to sneak in a workout or just sit with a cup of coffee.
Nice, Catherine. Nice. So you valued, I'm hearing you value 2 things there. One was time with yourself, kind of quiet time with yourself, and time with other people that fuel you.
Yes.
And you figured out strategies, right? Yeah, fantastic.
Yes. Yep. And it's playing around with it to find what time works for you when you're awake, when you're, it takes practice, and I definitely, he's 2 now. It took me a while. So.
Yes, yeah, and to start small too. Just kind of know what you value, what the goal is, and to start in small increments. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you. Does anybody else have any other questions before we wind up here? Well, you guys have been fantastic. Again, you're welcome to email me. I do offer one-on-one coaching, and I do speaking. I'm a keynote and motivational speaker, so I look forward to hearing from you.
Thank
Catherine,
you, Sarah.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you so much. This was such a great session. I know I learned a lot. I took a lot away from it. I hope everyone else did. And as always, you did a fantastic job.
Thank you.